The Wild West wasn't a movie. It was dumber, weirder, and way drunker. Behind every heroic legend was a guy trying to lasso a train or sell explosive soap. These 33 stories aren't just bizarre. They're historical proof that America's frontier ran on chaos, con jobs, and complete nonsense. 1. Imagine being so tired of your own criminal career that you decide to just ship yourself to the authorities. That was the brilliant retirement plan of an outlaw who, utterly fed up with life on the run, packed himself into a wooden crate and had it mailed to the nearest sheriff. He even included a helpful note. Here is a criminal. Open with care, which is probably the most considerate thing he ever did. You have to picture the scene at the post office. Some poor clerk looking at a human-sized box thinking it's probably just a very oddly shaped piano. Then the sheriff gets it, pries it open, and out pops a tired, dusty outlaw who basically just wanted to cancel his subscription to the outlaw life. It's the ultimate act of surrender, proving that sometimes the most effective way to turn yourself in is through the United States Postal Service. 2. Before influencers were selling us questionable supplements online, there was Jefferson Soapy Smith, a con artist who perfected the art of the 19th century loot box. His stage was a simple suitcase filled with soap bars. In front of a mesmerized crowd, he'd ostentatiously wrap a $100 bill around one bar, toss it in with the others, and then sell them for a hefty premium. The promise was simple. You might just wash your hands and find a fortune. Of course, the only thing people found was clean hands and an empty wallet. Using masterful sleight of hand, Soapy ensured the high-value bars always ended up back in his possession, while his associates in the crowd would win smaller bills to keep the hype going. It was a masterclass in exploiting greed, proving that people have been willing to pay way too much for a tiny chance at a big prize for a very, very long time. 3. Gunslinger. Clay Allison was a man who believed in direct feedback, especially when it came to his dental care. After a procedure left him in pain, he became convinced the dentist had pulled the wrong tooth. Now, a reasonable person might complain or demand a refund. Allison was not a reasonable person. He stormed back to the dentist's office, but not for a follow-up appointment. He dragged the terrified dentist to the chair, grabbed a pair of pliers, and proceeded to perform his own version of corrective surgery by yanking out one of the dentist's own teeth. It was his way of saying, "See, it hurts, doesn't it?" This is perhaps the most extreme customer satisfaction survey in history, a brutal reminder that in the Wild West, you really, really didn't want to mess up someone's order, especially when that someone was a notoriously short-tempered killer. 4. What do you do when a powerful corporation refuses to pay its taxes? Well, if you're the town of Chama, New Mexico, you do the most logical thing possible. You arrest its property. In this case, that property was a massive multi-ton steam engine. When the railroad company blew off a local tax bill, the town sheriff didn't just send a strongly worded letter. He marched down to the tracks with a heavy chain and literally arrested the locomotive, chaining it in place and effectively taking it hostage. Imagine the passengers' confusion as their train is put in cuffs. It's the ultimate display of small-town defiance, a hilarious clash between local law and industrial might, where the town decided to treat a piece of heavy machinery like a common deadbeat who skipped out on his bill. The train, unsurprisingly, did not resist arrest. 5. Duels were already a terrible idea, but two men in Texas found a way to make them even dumber. To settle their dispute, they agreed to a duel in a completely pitch-black room, turning a contest of skill into a lethal game of Marco Polo with bullets. The plan, if you can call it that, was to fire at the sound of the other person. As you can imagine, it went spectacularly wrong almost immediately. One of the duelists, fumbling around in the dark, somehow managed to set his own hair on fire. This sudden burst of light gave his opponent a perfect glowing target. The result was one man dead and the other likely needing a very serious haircut. It's a perfect example of how adding an extra layer of stupidity to an already moronic activity rarely ends well for anyone involved. 6. In 1859, San Francisco, a failed businessman named Joshua Norton had a mental break, but instead of fading into obscurity, He went viral 19th century style. He published a declaration in the local papers proclaiming himself Norton the First, Emperor of the United States. And the truly insane part? People just went along with it. Emperor Norton became a beloved local celebrity. He issued his own currency, which shops and restaurants actually accepted. He wore a ridiculous military uniform and inspected the city's streets with a dog by his side. When his uniform got shabby, the city of San Francisco literally bought him a new one. He was a living, breathing meme in a time before the internet, a testament to a city so wonderfully weird that when a man declared himself emperor, they didn't lock him up. They played along for decades. 7. In the early 1900s, San Diego was desperate for rain, so they hired a self-proclaimed rainmaker named Charles Hatfield for $10,000 to fill a local reservoir. Hatfield went to work with his secret chemical concoctions, and to everyone's shock, it started to rain. Then it kept raining, and it didn't stop. He had promised rain and delivered a biblical flood that destroyed bridges, homes, and railroad tracks, causing millions in damages. When the apocalyptic downpour finally ceased, a soaked Hatfield went to the city to collect his fee. The city council, standing in knee-deep water, basically told him to get lost. They argued that since he had caused such a catastrophic flood, it must have been an act of God, and therefore they didn't owe him a dime. He over-delivered on his promise so spectacularly that he talked himself out of a fortune. 8. Funerals in the Wild West could be as strange as the lives that preceded them. For some cowboys, the idea of lying down for eternity just didn't sit right. So a bizarre tradition emerged, burying them standing up. The logic, as grim as it was poetic, was that a cowboy should always be ready for one last ride, even in the afterlife. They would be interred vertically in their boots, fully dressed, sometimes even with their hands near where their holsters would be. It was the ultimate commitment to the cowboy persona, ensuring that even in death, they maintained their rugged, ready-for-action posture. It also must have made for some very confusing archaeological discoveries centuries later, leaving future scientists to wonder what strange, upright sleeping civilization once roamed the plains. 9. Hollywood has sold us the gunfight at the OK Corral as the heavyweight title fight of the Old West, a dramatic, drawn-out battle between good and evil. The truth is far more pathetic. The entire legendary shootout lasted about 30 seconds. That's it. You've probably had sneezes that lasted longer. It was less of an epic showdown and more of a brief, panicky exchange of bullets between some very nervous men. And the biggest lie is in the name itself. The gunfight didn't even happen at the OK Corral. It took place in a narrow, grimy, vacant lot down the street. So, the most iconic moment of the Wild West was essentially a 30-second argument in a back alley that got way out of hand. It's a spectacular piece of historical branding that proves if your story is boring, just give it a kick-ass name and people will remember it forever. 10. Some outlaws were criminal geniuses, meticulously planning every detail of a heist. And then there was the crew who subscribed to the more is always better school of thought, especially when it came to dynamite. Tasked with opening a bank safe, they didn't just use enough explosive to pop the lock. They used enough to send the safe, the money, and half the bank building into a different dimension. You can almost hear their thought process. Jim, you think 4 sticks is enough? Nah, use the whole crate. I don't want to have to come back tomorrow. The resulting explosion was a thundering success from a demolition perspective, but a catastrophic failure for a robbery. They transformed a fortune in cash into a cloud of expensive confetti, leaving them standing in a smoking crater with ringing ears and absolutely nothing to show for it except a valuable lesson in subtlety. 11. In the hyper-masculine world of the Wild West, stagecoach driving was a job for the toughest men alive, and one of the most respected drivers of them all was Charlie Parkhurst, a one-eyed, hard-drinking, tobacco-spitting legend who could handle a 6-horse team through blizzards and bandit attacks without breaking a sweat. For 30 years, Charlie was the gold standard of grit. Then, upon Charlie's death, the local doctor made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the community. Charlie was a woman. She had lived her entire adult life as a man, fooling everyone, from her fellow drivers to the robbers she fought off. This wasn't just a secret. It was a long-form performance art piece conducted in the most dangerous theater on Earth. It's the ultimate proof that a woman could do a man's job, and in this case, do it better and with way more style. 12. Texas history is filled with epic conflicts, but none were as fundamentally ridiculous as the fence-cutting wars. This wasn't a fight over gold or honor. It was a violent, multi-year temper tantrum over the invention of barbed wire. For generations, cowboys had roamed a boundless open range. Then, suddenly, ranchers started stringing up this devil's rope, creating the radical concept of private property. The cowboys, who saw this as a personal insult from the god of fences, responded not by adapting, but by forming masked gangs of nippers who would ride out at night and cut the wires. This led to ambushes, gunfights, and full-scale chaos. It was basically a massive, deadly argument between the people who wanted a front yard and the people who insisted on riding their horse through it, proving that progress is all fun and games until it messes with your commute. 13. Any decent saloon in the Wild West had its interesting regulars, but the Boston Saloon in Virginia City had them all beat. Their star patron was a bear, a literal, full-sized bear who had developed a taste for the finer things in life, namely whiskey and beer. This magnificent creature wasn't chained up in a corner for show. It was an active participant in the saloon's social life, often seen lapping booze out of a bowl set right on the bar. You have to appreciate the sheer, glorious irresponsibility of it. It's one thing to have a bar fight, but it's another thing entirely when one of the combatants can hibernate for 6 months and literally kill you with a single swipe. It was the ultimate "don't feed the animals" sign come to life, and it made for one bar you'd never ever want to get kicked out of. 14. The arrival of the cast iron stove was meant to usher in a new era of warmth and civilized cooking. For many pioneers, however, it ushered in an era of unexpected and very loud explosions. The problem was simple user error. People who were used to massive, open-hearth fireplaces saw this compact metal box and thought, well, I better cram as much fuel in there as humanly possible to get it really hot. This strategy, which ignored the basic laws of physics and pressure, effectively turned their brand new kitchen appliance into a ticking bomb. A peaceful family evening could be instantly interrupted by their stove deciding to become shrapnel, launching itself through a wall and taking the pot roast with it. It was a harsh but effective lesson that reading the instruction manual is sometimes more important for survival than knowing how to shoot a gun. 15. The Dalton gang's ambition was only matched by their stupidity. Not content with being successful outlaws, they decided to attempt a stunt so brazen it was practically begging for failure, robbing 2 banks at once in broad daylight in their own hometown of Coffeyville, Kansas. This is the criminal equivalent of trying to cheat on your spouse at your own anniversary party. The gang, some of them wearing laughably bad fake beards, rode into town where they were immediately recognized by, well, everyone. The citizens of Coffeyville didn't run and hide. They grabbed every firearm they could find and turned the town square into a free-for-all firing range. The Daltons' plan for a legendary double heist collapsed into a bloody, chaotic mess, proving the #1 rule of crime: don't rob people who have known you since you were in diapers. 16. The pioneers who settled a particular town in Montana were tough, resilient people who could build a community from nothing in the harsh wilderness. But there was one challenge they could not overcome: agreeing on a name. This wasn't a minor disagreement. It was a years-long political deadlock that paralyzed the entire town. Every suggestion, from New Liberty to Smith's Junction, was met with furious opposition. It was the world's most frustrating homeowners association meeting, but it never ended. Things got so bad that for years, the town remained officially nameless, forcing the US government to simply label it City X on all official maps and documents. They could survive blizzards, droughts, and disease, but they were utterly defeated by their own stubborn inability to cooperate on the most basic of tasks. It was a whole town built on pure, unadulterated spite. 17. In the annals of breathtakingly audacious legal claims, few can top the outlaw who decided to sue his victim. After robbing a train, this criminal genius, whose name history has wisely forgotten, managed to injure himself during the getaway. Perhaps he tripped over a bag of stolen money or got a splinter from the floorboards. Instead of quietly nursing his wounds and his bruised ego, he decided the real culprit was the railroad company itself for providing an unsafe work environment for him to commit a felony in. He actually filed a lawsuit against them, demanding compensation for his on-the-job injury. You have to admire the sheer, unadulterated nerve. It's a legal strategy so profoundly dumb it borders on performance art. This is the kind of guy who would sue a homeowner for emotional distress after getting bitten by their dog while robbing their house. Needless to say, the judge was not amused. 18. The Great Diamond Hoax of 1872 was a masterclass in understanding that rich people will believe literally anything if it means getting richer. Two cunning prospectors, Philip Arnold and John Slack, pulled off a scam of epic proportions by simply scattering a bunch of cheap, uncut diamonds and other gems in a remote field in Colorado. Then, they led a group of America's wealthiest investors, we're talking Tiffany & Co's executives and powerful bankers, on a secret expedition to their discovery. These titans of industry, blinded by glittering dollar signs, fell for it hook, line, and sinker. They eagerly invested millions, convinced they were on the ground floor of the next big boom. The scam was only exposed when a proper geologist went out and realized the gems were scattered in a way that made absolutely no geological sense. It was the 19th century equivalent of a Nigerian prince email, and the supposed smartest men in the country fell for it completely. 19. The Wild West had a notoriously low bar for what could trigger a gunfight. Disputes over cards, land, or a woman were common, but one legendary shootout in a dusty Texas town started for the noblest and dumbest reason of all. Someone insulted a dog. That's right. One man made a disparaging remark about another man's beloved canine companion, and in a place with fragile egos and easy access to firearms, that was a capital offense. Words were exchanged, threats were made, and soon the street was filled with the sound of gunfire. By the time the smoke cleared, several men lay dead or dying. They weren't fighting for honor or justice. They were fighting for the dignity of a dog who probably had no idea what was going on and was likely just hoping someone would throw a stick. It's a tragic, ridiculous reminder that sometimes the only thing separating a peaceful afternoon from a bloodbath was a single, poorly timed, "your dog is ugly." 20. Capitalism was a full-contact sport in the 19th century. And nowhere was this more evident than the Royal Gorge War. This wasn't a corporate rivalry settled in a boardroom. It was an actual, literal war fought between two railroad companies, the Santa Fe and the Rio Grande, over a valuable stretch of canyon in Colorado. When negotiations failed, both sides stopped hiring lawyers and started hiring gunslingers. They built stone forts, dug trenches, and exchanged gunfire like two opposing armies, all for the right to lay a few miles of track. It was corporate competition taken to its most absurdly violent conclusion. Imagine Apple and Google settling a patent dispute by hiring mercenaries to lay siege to each other's headquarters. That's what happened in the Royal Gorge. It was a bizarre, bloody chapter in American business history where the stock market was influenced by who had the better marksman. 21. Calamity Jane is remembered as a legendary frontierwoman, a sharpshooting, tough-as-nails heroine. The truth is, her greatest skill wasn't her aim, but her incredible talent for personal branding and outright lying. She was the original influencer, crafting an entirely fictional persona for herself and then selling it to an eager public. She claimed to be a scout for General Custer, a friend of Wild Bill Hickok, and a fearless Indian fighter. In reality, she was mostly a drifter and an alcoholic who was a great storyteller. She was so good at spinning yarns about her own supposed adventures that dime novelists ate it up, turning her into a national celebrity. She basically invented the fake it till you make it strategy, proving that in the Wild West, a compelling, completely fabricated backstory was often more valuable than actual skills. 22. The traveling medicine show was a staple of the Wild West, promising miracle cures for everything from baldness to bad attitudes. and a key part of the sales pitch often involved a Native American expert who could attest to the power of these ancient secret remedies. The only problem? A shocking number of these so-called experts were just white guys in bad makeup. These imposters would slather on some dark paint, stick a feather in their hair, and speak in broken, stereotypical English to sell bottles of what was usually just whiskey, molasses, and snake oil. It was an offensive, cringeworthy, and yet wildly successful marketing tactic. People in the crowd, desperate for a cure, would eagerly hand over their money, completely fooled by a guy who probably had a name like Steve from Ohio and whose ancient tribal wisdom came from a pamphlet he read last week. 23. The story of El Fuego Baca is so unbelievable it sounds like a tall tale, but it actually happened. As a young, self-appointed deputy in New Mexico, Baca found himself in a shootout. A very, very one-sided shootout. He was cornered in a tiny shack by a posse of around 80 angry cowboys who wanted him dead. For the next 36 hours, they unleashed a storm of lead upon his flimsy shelter, firing an estimated 4,000 rounds. When the smoke cleared and the posse finally gave up, Baca emerged without a single scratch. The shack was reportedly so full of holes it looked like a block of Swiss cheese, yet somehow not one bullet had found its mark. He didn't just survive, he basically walked away from a situation that should have been a statistical impossibility, cementing his legend as either the luckiest man alive or someone who had made a very good deal with the devil. 24. Visiting the dentist in the Wild West was a terrifying prospect, filled with pain and primitive tools. One dentist, a showman known as Painless Parker, came up with a brilliant, if slightly evil, solution to this problem. To drown out the blood-curdling screams of his patients, he would hire a full brass band to play at top volume right outside his office. As he went to work with his pliers and drills, the sounds of agony would be masked by the cheerful, blaring notes of a trumpet and a tuba. It was a genius stroke of marketing and psychological warfare. Potential customers outside would hear a lively concert instead of shrieks of terror, making them far more likely to step inside. It was dentistry by distraction, a practice built on the simple, effective principle that if the music is loud enough, you can ignore almost any horror. 25. There's a fine line between bravery and stupidity, and a certain cowboy in Texas erased that line completely by attempting to lasso a moving train. Fueled by a potent combination of whiskey and a catastrophic lack of judgment, this hero decided to prove his roping skills on the toughest steer of them all. A multi-ton iron horse belching steam and fire. You can just imagine his thought process, or lack thereof. He likely spurred his horse, swung his lasso with magnificent confidence, and aimed for the smokestack, probably expecting the locomotive to come to a screeching, compliant halt. Instead, the laws of physics delivered a swift and brutal verdict. The train, unsurprisingly, did not stop. It kept going, turning his heroic attempt into a spectacular failure that likely involved a snapped rope, a very confused horse, and a cowboy picking gravel out of his teeth for a week. It was a perfect one-act play about the eternal conflict between man, machine, and cheap liquor. 26. The Johnson County War in Wyoming was less of a war and more of a state-sanctioned hit job by the wealthy elite. A group of powerful, aristocratic cattle barons got tired of smaller, independent farmers allegedly rustling their cattle. So they did what any rational business person would do. They hired a private army of mercenaries, drew up a literal death list of 70 local residents, and chartered a train to go and, well, exterminate them. This wasn't some back-alley feud. It was a full-scale invasion force complete with its own supply wagon and journalists to document their anticipated victory. They called it an expedition for the public good, which is the 19th century corporate speak for, "We're going to murder our competition." The whole affair quickly devolved into a chaotic siege, proving that even with a private army and a sense of entitlement, being the bad guy in a real-life Western is a lot messier than it looks in the movies. 27. When miners in Bisbee, Arizona, went on strike for better working conditions in 1917, the local sheriff and the powerful Phelps Dodge Mining Corporation came up with a uniquely villainous solution. Instead of negotiating, They deputized a 2,000-man posse, rounded up nearly 1,300 striking miners, many of them at gunpoint, and marched them to the local baseball field. From there, they loaded the men into filthy, manure-filled cattle cars, shipped them 200 miles into the desolate New Mexico desert, and just dumped them there. No food, no water, no shelter. They were told never to return. This wasn't just union busting. It was a mass kidnapping and illegal deportation, orchestrated by a private company with the help of local law enforcement. It was a terrifying example of corporate power running so rampant that they could literally exile a chunk of their workforce into the middle of nowhere and get away with it.